90-year-old veteran bullied by bikers until she makes a shocking phone call. The Shadow Reapers were used to getting their way, their intimidation a well-oiled machine. But when they decided to bully 90-year-old Peggy Thompson, they triggered a response nobody saw coming. A phone call that would shatter their reign of terror. The town of Riverstone, Virginia, nestled in a valley where the Shenandoah River snaked like a silver ribbon, usually hummed with the gentle rhythm of small-town life. The loudest sounds were typically the cheerful banter from Miller's Gas and Grub or the distant chimes of the old church bell. But that tranquility was about to be shattered, not by a natural disaster, but by the guttural roar of engines, the arrival of the Shadow Reapers motorcycle gang. They descended upon the town like a storm cloud, their chrome gleaming menacingly under the unassuming Virginia sky. No one in Riverstone, not the friendly store owners nor the gossiping retirees on park benches, would have imagined that their unlikely savior would be a 90-year-old woman, seemingly as delicate as a dried flower pressed between the pages of time. Yet, Peggy Thompson, a resident of quiet dignity, carried within her a past forged in the fires of conflict, a history those leather-clad thugs could scarcely fathom. She possessed a quiet strength, a steely resolve hidden beneath a veneer of grandmotherly charm, and the power to ignite a transformation that would ripple through their peaceful community like an earthquake. This isn't just another tale of a defenseless senior citizen bullied by thugs. It's a testament to the enduring embers of courage that never truly die, the unexpected reservoirs of strength found in the most unassuming individuals, and the extraordinary ways a community can bind together when faced with a common threat. Stay with this story, and you'll witness how a single phone call, a whisper across the lines of shared history and unwavering loyalty, can rewrite an entire town's narrative, turning fear into defiance and vulnerability into unbreakable unity. And if you appreciate stories that celebrate the indomitable spirit of ordinary people rising to extraordinary occasions, be sure to hit that subscribe button for more tales of the unexpected heroes among us. The Virginia sun, still hesitant to fully claim the morning sky, cast long shadows across the quiet streets of Riverstone as Peggy Thompson began her daily routine. Her silver hair, always impeccably styled, framed a face that bore the elegant map of a life richly lived, etched with the quiet strength of resilience. Decades spent in the military, a chapter of her life she rarely spoke of, but one that defined the very core of her being, had instilled in her a posture of unwavering erectness, a subtle defiance against the relentless march of time. She carefully guided her well-loved, if somewhat battle-scarred, Ford Taurus into Miller's Gas and Grub, the only gas station she had frequented for over 3 decades, a familiar ritual in her predictable yet comforting life. "Morning, Mrs. Thompson," a cheerful voice called out, slicing through the early morning stillness. Young Billy Miller, the ever-smiling station attendant, beamed at her from beneath the brim of his worn baseball cap. His smile was as genuine as the small-town air, a familiar and comforting part of Riverstone's friendly fabric. "Just to fill up today, Billy. And how are your parents doing?" Peggy replied, her movements measured and graceful as she eased out of her car. Each step was a quiet testament to the discipline that had been her steadfast companion through the tumultuous decades of her service. The familiar, comforting aroma of gasoline mingling with the crisp scent of morning dew filled the air as she began to meticulously pump the fuel. Her thoughts, however, drifted towards the upcoming Veterans of Foreign Wars meeting scheduled for later that morning. Not merely a social gathering for reminiscing, but a vital lifeline to her past, a sanctuary where she could connect with comrades who spoke the same unspoken language of shared sacrifice and unwavering duty. The tranquil serenity of the morning was abruptly shattered, not by a crash of thunder, but by a distant, guttural growl that rapidly escalated, growing in intensity with alarming speed. The rumble of motorcycles, at first a faint tremor in the air, intensified into an aggressive, menacing thrum that vibrated through the quiet gas station, sending shivers down the spines of any nearby songbirds. 5 motorcycles. 10. 15. They materialized from the edge of town like dark phantoms, their chrome glinting with an unsettling brilliance under the soft morning light. The Shadow Reapers had arrived, their reputation preceding them like a noxious odor. Peggy's hand remained remarkably steady on the gas pump, her gaze unflinching as she observed them in the reflection of her car's side mirror. Years of ingrained military training, dormant but never truly extinguished, clicked into place with practiced efficiency. Assess the threat. Maintain situational awareness. Remain calm. Her heart rate didn't even quicken. She had faced far more formidable foes in far more treacherous environments. The leader, a hulking brute known as Viper, dismounted his Harley-Davidson with calculated arrogance, his boots thudding heavily on the asphalt. His leather vest, adorned with an array of menacing patches depicting skulls and snarling beasts, screamed of violence and a blatant disregard for the established order. His eyes, cold and predatory like those of a caged wolf, immediately locked onto Peggy, sizing her up with undisguised contempt. Well, what do we have rolling in here?" Viper's voice, thick with a sneer that dripped with disdain, sliced through the morning air, eliciting a chorus of coarse snickers and vulgar laughter from his equally unsavory cohorts. "Looks like Grandma decided to take her walker for a Sunday spin." Peggy continued to calmly fill her gas tank, her expression betraying none of the disgust the sight of these hooligans stirred within her. She had witnessed true horror, true depravity. These petty thugs were merely an irritating nuisance. Viper swaggered closer, his heavy boots crunching ominously on the gravel, deliberately invading her personal space. "Hey there, old-timer. Are you deaf or just plain senile? We're talking to you." Peggy finished fueling her car with meticulous care, precisely slotting the nozzle back into its holster. Turning to face him, her gaze was direct, unwavering, and utterly devoid of fear. "If you have something of substance to articulate, I suggest you do so plainly, young man." A greasy-haired biker with a sneering leer, a serpent tattoo snaking up his exposed forearm, chimed in, his voice dripping with mockery. "Maybe the old bat needs a hearing aid, Viper. Or maybe she's just lost her marbles." More crude laughter erupted from the assembled gang, the sound grating and unpleasant. Viper took another step closer, his hulking frame casting a long, intimidating shadow over Peggy. "This town, old woman, it operates under a new set of rules now, and you're currently looking at the enforcers of those rules." He gestured expansively around at his menacing crew, his eyes narrowed with self-importance. Peggy met his gaze unflinchingly, her own eyes holding the steady glint of tempered steel. "Every town has rules, son. Decency, respect for others, and common courtesy are usually considered a fairly solid foundation to build upon." Viper let out a harsh, humorless chuckle, the sound devoid of genuine mirth. "Respect? Ha! Respect is taken, you oblivious old fool, not politely given out like candy on Halloween." He made a sweeping gesture towards his gang, their leather-clad figures radiating menace. "We are the respect around here now. You do well to remember that." Peggy's lips thinned almost imperceptibly, a subtle tightening that betrayed her growing displeasure. "Real respect, young man, is something that is earned through integrity, through honorable actions, through contributing something positive to the world. And so far," she paused, her gaze sweeping over the assembled thugs with undisguised disdain, "all I see before me are a group of misguided boys desperately trying to play at being men, hiding behind loud noises and cheap theatrics." The air around them crackled with palpable tension, thick and heavy like an impending storm. The only sound for a long, agonizing moment was the uneven idling of the motorcycles, a mechanical purr that now seemed to hold an undercurrent of threat. Viper's face, already coarse and unpleasant, contorted with a dangerous surge of raw rage. His hand shot out with surprising speed, his thick, calloused fingers clamping around Peggy's arm with bruising force, his grip like a steel vise. "You want to learn about respect, you wrinkled old hag? We'll teach you all about respect, the hard way." His grip tightened cruelly, a sharp jolt of pain shooting up Peggy's arm. Her knuckles whitened under the pressure, but her face remained impassive, her eyes locked onto Viper's with unwavering defiance. But Peggy didn't flinch, didn't cry out, didn't even allow a flicker of fear to betray her inner calm. Her eyes, though bearing the delicate wrinkles of age, held a steely glint, an unyielding resolve that seemed to momentarily unsettle even Viper in his rage. "Unhand me immediately, son," she stated, her voice remarkably calm and steady despite the agonizing pressure on her arm. It was a voice accustomed to command, accustomed to being obeyed, even in the face of chaos and danger. An undercurrent of steel ran beneath the surface, a silent promise of consequences that even Viper, in his drunken arrogance, seemed to register for a fleeting, unsettling moment. He let out a harsh bark of laughter, a mocking sound laced with cruel amusement. "Or what? Old lady, you gonna call the cops? Guess what, Buttercup, they're on our payroll. We own this town now." "No," Peggy said, her voice low and deliberately even, each word measured and precise like a carefully aimed shot. "I'm going to make a phone call." Ignoring his painful grip, she calmly reached into her worn leather purse with her free hand, retrieving her trusty, if somewhat antiquated, flip phone. Viper and his gang watched her, momentarily taken aback by her sheer audacity, their crude taunts momentarily silenced by her unexpected action. He tightened his grip on her arm, his knuckles white with the strain. But Peggy remained utterly unfazed, her fingers moving with surprising dexterity as she dialed a familiar number from memory. "Who you calling? Your bingo buddies at the retirement home?" Viper sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm, trying to regain his lost momentum. "Gonna sick Mildred and Agnes on us?" Peggy resolutely ignored his childish taunts, holding the phone firmly to her ear, her gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the confines of the gas station. The phone rang twice, the electronic chirping sound a stark contrast to the aggressive rumble of the motorcycles. A gruff, no-nonsense voice answered on the other end. "Morrison." "Jack." Peggy's voice was calm, controlled, betraying none of the physical discomfort she was enduring. "It's Peggy Thompson here. Do you happen to recall that rather eventful night we shared near Key San, back in '68? There was a distinct pause on the other end of the line, a beat of profound silence pregnant with shared history, with unspoken memories of adrenaline-fueled nights and desperate acts of courage. Then, Iron Jack Morrison's voice, once hard and unyielding, softened with an immediate and unmistakable surge of recognition and warmth. "Peggy? By God, Peggy, is that really you? Of course, I bloody well remember that night. Wouldn't be drawing breath if it wasn't for your steady hand at the controls. What in the world is wrong, Peggy?" Peggy's eyes, sharp and focused, locked onto Viper's, a quiet intensity burning in their depths. "Well, Jack, I seem to have encountered a few, shall we say impolite young men here, who appear to be in dire need of a rather thorough lesson in the true meaning of respect. They go by the charming moniker of the Shadow Reapers, and they seem to have developed the rather misguided notion that the town of Riverstone now belongs to them and their unconventional code of conduct." The change in Iron Jack's voice was instantaneous and dramatic, the previous warmth and familiarity replaced by a chilling edge that could cut through steel. "Where are they, Peggy? Give me their exact location now." The words were clipped, urgent, laced with a barely suppressed fury. Peggy, her gaze never wavering from Viper's increasingly uneasy face, calmly provided the exact location of Miller's Gas and Grub, her voice steady and precise despite Viper's continued painful grip on her arm. "They're currently engaging in a rather spirited demonstration of what they mistakenly believe to be disrespect, Jack. Hold tight, Peggy. Do not engage. We're rolling out. ETA, 10 minutes tops." The line went abruptly dead, the silence that followed feeling thick with unspoken promises and impending retribution. Viper, finally beginning to sense a palpable shift in the atmosphere, a subtle but undeniable change in the balance of power, slowly released her arm. A flicker of uncertainty, the first crack in his carefully constructed facade of arrogance, appeared in his eyes. "Who the hell was that? Your geriatric boyfriend?" he stammered, trying to mask his growing unease with a forced chuckle. Peggy slowly rubbed her aching arm, the angry red marks already blooming on her pale skin. She met Viper's gaze, her expression calm and unperturbed. "That, young man, was someone who possesses a rather profound understanding of the true meaning of the word respect, something you and your associates appear to be woefully lacking. A low, thunderous rumble, far more potent and purposeful than the earlier arrival of the Shadow Reapers, began to grow in the distance, echoing their initial approach, but with a distinctly different timbre, a deeper, more resonant growl that spoke of raw power and unwavering determination. Soon, the distant sound solidified into the unmistakable roar of approaching motorcycles. But these weren't the haphazardly maintained, sputtering machines favored by Viper's gang. These bikes gleamed, their polished chrome catching the hesitant sunlight, their engines purring with disciplined power. Their riders, clad in worn but well-maintained leather, their postures erect and purposeful, exuded an aura of quiet competence and unwavering resolve. One by one, then in small, tightly knit groups, motorcycles began to stream into the gas station, their riders a mix of men and women, all veterans, their faces bearing the silent stories of battles fought and sacrifices made. They moved with a practiced efficiency honed over years of military service, their bikes arranging themselves in a protective cordon around Peggy and her car, a silent, formidable shield against any further aggression. At the very forefront of this imposing group, a man with closely cropped silver hair, catching the morning light, dismounted his powerful machine. His leather jacket bore no flashy insignias, no gaudy displays of affiliation, just the quiet, understated emblem of their shared brotherhood, the American flag, worn and weathered, yet undeniably powerful. Iron Jack Morrison. Billy Miller, the perpetually cheerful gas station attendant, watched the unfolding scene from behind the safety of the reinforced glass window of his kiosk, his young face a mask of utter disbelief, his jaw practically scraping the floor. These weren't the rowdy, unpredictable bikers he occasionally saw passing through town. These were different. There was an air of authority, of quiet command, that radiated from them, a stark contrast to the chaotic menace of the Shadow Reapers. Iron Jack walked directly towards Peggy, his weathered face etched with concern. His keen gaze swept over her, taking in her composed demeanor, then fixed on the angry red marks still visible on her arm. His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, a silent promise of retribution flickering within their depths. "You all right, Peggy? Did these animals hurt you?" "I'm quite all right, Jack," Peggy replied calmly, her voice reassuring. "Merely a slight misunderstanding on their part regarding the boundaries of acceptable behavior. A misunderstanding I believe you and your colleagues are about to rectify." Iron Jack turned his attention to Viper and his now noticeably subdued gang, his very presence radiating an aura of quiet authority that instantly dwarfed Viper's earlier posturing and bluster. His gaze was steady, unwavering, and held a chilling intensity that sent a shiver of genuine fear down the spines of the assembled thugs. "You boys appear to have a rather significant problem with Mrs. Thompson. Let me assure you, in no uncertain terms, that any problem you have with Peggy, you now have with each and every one of us." His voice was low, dangerously soft, yet carried the undeniable weight of unspoken promises, promises of swift and decisive action. Viper, for the first time since his grand entrance, looked genuinely unnerved. He was now significantly outnumbered, and the very air around these newcomers crackled with a palpable intensity, a simmering threat he had completely failed to anticipate. He could see the unwavering resolve etched on their faces, the silent, unspoken loyalty they held for this unassuming old woman. The bravado that had fueled his earlier aggression began to evaporate like morning mist. This ain't your fight, old-timers," Viper snarled, trying desperately to regain some semblance of his earlier bluster, though his voice now lacked conviction. He gestured vaguely towards his gang, their earlier swagger replaced by a palpable unease. Iron Jack simply offered a slow, deliberate smile, a chilling, mirthless expression that held no warmth whatsoever. "Everything that concerns Peggy concerns us? That's a principle we live by. Do you understand me, son?" Viper, seeing the absolute unwavering resolve in the veteran's eyes, the silent promise of controlled violence held back only by Peggy's calm presence, finally backed down, his carefully constructed facade of menace deflating like a punctured tire. Yeah, we get it. We were just leaving. He gave a jerky, almost panicked signal to his gang, and one by one, the Shadow Reapers sheepishly mounted their bikes and, with a distinct lack of their earlier triumphant roars, hastily departed from the gas station, their arrogance replaced by a palpable sense of fear and a desperate need to put distance between themselves and this unexpected force. "They'll be back, Peggy," Iron Jack said, his weathered gaze following the retreating bikers, his voice grim. "They're not the type to let something like this slide. Their pride's been wounded." "Then we'll be ready for them, Jack," Peggy replied, a hint of steely determination hardening her voice. "Riverstone is our town, and we'll be damned if we let a pack of wolves like that intimidate our community." The veterans, their faces grim and resolute, formed an impromptu, highly organized convoy around Peggy's somewhat battered Taurus as she drove home, a silent, formidable escort, a clear message to anyone watching that Peggy Thompson was under their protection. Riverstone was about to learn a valuable lesson, that protecting one of their own, especially one as fiercely independent and quietly courageous as Peggy Thompson, meant facing down any threat, no matter how loud, how menacing, or how heavily armed. The quiet town had just found its backbone, forged in the shared history and unwavering loyalty of a group of veterans and the indomitable spirit of a 90-year-old woman. In the uneasy calm that followed the Shadow Reaper's hasty departure, a palpable tension settled over Riverstone, thicker than the humid Virginia air. It was the quiet before the storm, a fragile truce born not of peace, but of a temporary stalemate. The Shadow Reapers had been forced to retreat, their arrogance bruised, their reputations slightly tarnished, but no one, least of all Peggy and the Veterans Guard, believed it was truly over. Viper's pride, a volatile and dangerous thing, had been deeply wounded, and wounded predators were often the most unpredictable. Peggy, though outwardly calm, felt a familiar unease stirring within her. It was the same gut feeling she'd experienced countless times before deployments, the quiet anticipation of impending conflict. She knew Viper wouldn't simply slink away. He would be licking his wounds, regrouping, and, more importantly, plotting his revenge. The brazen challenge to his authority in front of his own gang would not be forgotten, and Peggy knew she had become the focal point of his simmering rage. Iron Jack and the Veterans Guard, equally aware of the fragility of the current peace, didn't wait for the storm to break. They transitioned seamlessly into a state of heightened alert, their years of military training kicking in with practiced efficiency. The VFW Hall, usually a place of quiet camaraderie and shared memories, became their de facto headquarters, buzzing with hushed conversations, the rustle of maps, and the clinking of equipment. Strategies were discussed in low voices over lukewarm coffee. Intelligence was meticulously gathered, and contingency plans were drawn up, every detail considered with the precision of a well-oiled machine. They operate on intimidation and fear, Peggy stated during one of their initial meetings, her voice calm and analytical. "We need to dismantle that. We need to show the town, unequivocally, that they no longer have to be afraid." The Veterans Guard, under Iron Jack's capable leadership, immediately implemented a plan. They established regular patrols throughout Riverstone, their visible presence a silent but powerful deterrent to any further acts of aggression from the Shadow Reapers. They offered protection to local businesses, standing guard outside shops and restaurants, their disciplined movements and watchful eyes a stark and reassuring contrast to the chaotic menace of Viper's gang. Sheriff Brody, a man who deeply respected Peggy and who understood the unique and precarious situation Riverstone now found itself in, unofficially turned a blind eye to the Veterans Guard's activities, offering subtle support where he could, understanding that sometimes the lines between law and order blurred in the face of extraordinary circumstances. The townspeople, initially wary of the biker gangs, found themselves increasingly reassured by the quiet competence and unwavering dedication of the Veterans Guard. These weren't reckless thugs. They were their neighbors, their friends, men and women who had served their country and were now stepping up to protect their community. A sense of gratitude, tinged with a newfound hope, began to blossom in Riverstone. However, the uneasy peace was not to last. True to Iron Jack's grim prediction, the Shadow Reapers returned, their harassment escalating from petty vandalism to more overt acts of intimidation. Shop windows were smashed in the dead of night. Threatening messages were scrawled on public walls, and whispers of violence circulated through the town like a poisonous gas. One evening, as Peggy was leaving the local grocery store, her arms laden with bags, she found herself deliberately cornered by Viper and a handful of his most menacing-looking cronies. Well, look what the cat dragged in," Viper sneered, his eyes narrowed with undisguised malice. "The old busybody. You just can't seem to leave well enough alone. Can you, old woman?" Peggy stood tall, her shoulders squared, her gaze meeting Viper's without a hint of fear. "This isn't about me, son," she said, her voice clear and steady despite the palpable threat radiating from the men surrounding her. "This is about your complete and utter lack of respect for this community and its people." Viper let out a harsh, ugly laugh that echoed off the brick walls of the surrounding buildings. He gestured dismissively towards the empty street. "Looks like your little army of geriatric warriors isn't around to protect you now. Is it, Grandma? Seems like you're all alone now." His cronies snickered, their eyes glinting with predatory anticipation. Suddenly, as if materializing from the very shadows of the surrounding buildings, figures began to emerge. It wasn't a large, organized force, but a diverse group of ordinary townspeople. Mr. Henderson, the elderly owner of the local bookstore, his usually gentle face set with surprising determination. Sarah, the young waitress from the diner, her apron still tied around her waist, her eyes blazing with anger. Even a group of teenagers, their initial apprehension replaced by a surge of youthful defiance. They had had enough. They were no longer willing to cower in fear. "She's not alone, Viper," called out Mr. Henderson, his voice surprisingly firm and resonant in the tense silence. He stepped forward, his frail frame surprisingly resolute. "Yeah, you overgrown bully," shouted one of the teenagers, his voice cracking with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. "Leave her alone." Viper's face contorted in disbelief, his eyes darting from Peggy to the growing number of townspeople who were now surrounding them, their initial apprehension replaced by a shared sense of outrage. "What the hell is this? You think you can stand up to us?" "This is our town, Viper," said Sarah, her voice ringing with conviction. "And we're done being afraid. You and your thugs are nothing but cowards who prey on the weak." "Well, guess what? We're not weak. Not anymore." Outnumbered and facing a united front of ordinary citizens who had finally found their courage, Viper and his gang, their threats and intimidation suddenly rendered powerless against the collective resolve of the community, found their bravado crumbling. With a final, frustrated snarl, Viper shoved past Peggy, his eyes promising retribution, and he and his crew retreated once more, their tails metaphorically between their legs. Peggy watched them go, a quiet satisfaction settling within her. The town was finally starting to push back. The fear that had gripped Riverstone for so long was beginning to dissipate, replaced by a burgeoning sense of unity and a shared determination to protect their home. However, Peggy and the Veterans Guard knew this was merely a small victory in a larger conflict. Viper's pride had been publicly humiliated, and they anticipated a more significant, more violent retaliation. Intelligence gathered from various sources suggested Viper was actively reaching out to other, more ruthless gangs in neighboring territories, even to disreputable mercenaries, seeking to bolster his forces for a large-scale confrontation. The storm clouds were gathering once more over Riverstone, darker and more menacing than before. The final showdown was coming. The intelligence proved chillingly accurate. Under the cloak of a moonless night, a larger, more menacing force descended upon Riverstone. This wasn't just the Shadow Reapers anymore. The guttural roar of their engines was now interwoven with the deeper, more aggressive thrum of bikes bearing the colors of rival gangs. Their riders hardened, their faces grim. Whispers on the wind spoke of hired muscle too, shadowy figures with cold eyes and the unmistakable air of professional killers. Viper, it seemed, had called in every favor, every dark debt he could muster. The attack wasn't haphazard. It was a coordinated assault, a chilling display of organized aggression that sent a fresh wave of fear rippling through the town. Key points were targeted simultaneously: the small police station, the businesses that had openly supported the Veterans Guard, even the homes of some of the more vocal townsfolk who had stood up to Viper. Molotov cocktails arced through the night sky, painting the quiet streets with bursts of orange flame. The air filled with the acrid smell of burning wood and gasoline, the sounds of shattering glass and panic shouts replacing the usual evening calm. But Riverstone was no longer the unsuspecting, vulnerable town the Shadow Reapers had first rolled into. Peggy and the Veterans Guard had anticipated this escalation, their preparations meticulous, their resolve unwavering. The quiet streets, which had once seemed so peaceful, transformed into a strategic battleground. As the attackers moved in, expecting to find easy targets, they found themselves facing a well-organized, determined defense. The Veterans Guard, strategically positioned throughout the town, moved with the precision and coordination of a seasoned military unit. They weren't just reacting. They were intercepting, flanking, and disrupting the attackers' movements. But it wasn't just the veterans. Inspired by Peggy's courage and the Guard's unwavering commitment, the townspeople had mobilized once more. Ordinary citizens, armed with whatever they could find, baseball bats, garden tools, even fire extinguishers, formed roadblocks, guided their neighbors to safety, and provided crucial support to the defending veterans. Billy Miller, the gas station attendant, was a whirlwind of activity, his small frame darting through the chaos, relaying information via a network of walkie-talkies, his cheerful demeanor replaced by a focused intensity. The small police force, though outnumbered, fought with grit and determination, Sheriff Brody leading the charge, his face grim but his resolve unbreakable. He trusted the Veterans Guard, knew their capabilities, and the two forces worked seamlessly together, a unified front against the invading darkness. Viper, leading the main assault, his face a mask of savage triumph, was initially confident. He had brought overwhelming force, or so he thought. But as the night wore on, his confidence began to fray. His carefully laid plans were unraveling, his hired muscle finding themselves outmaneuvered and outfought by a combination of military discipline and sheer, unadulterated hometown grit. The climax of the battle converged on the town square, the heart of Riverstone. The air was thick with smoke, the flickering flames casting long, dancing shadows. Peggy, flanked by Iron Jack and Sheriff Brody, found herself facing Viper, his face contorted with a mixture of fury and desperation. Around them, the fighting raged, but here, in the center of the square, a tense silence descended. "This doesn't have to end like this, Viper," Peggy said, her voice carrying clearly across the square, a beacon of calm amidst the surrounding chaos. "You started this, you old witch," Viper roared, his hand gripping a crude, makeshift weapon, his eyes wild with rage and frustration. "No, Viper," Peggy replied, her voice firm but devoid of malice. "You did. You chose fear over respect. You chose violence over community. We simply chose to stand together." She took a step forward, her gaze unwavering, her presence radiating a quiet strength that belied her age. There's a profound difference between leading through intimidation and earning genuine respect. You've only ever understood the first. Viper lunged, a desperate, final act of defiance. But he was intercepted in a blur of motion by Iron Jack and Sheriff Brody. The ensuing struggle was brief and brutal. The hired mercenaries, realizing the tide had irrevocably turned against them, began to slip away into the darkness, their professional detachment overriding any sense of loyalty to Viper. The remaining Shadow Reapers, their bravado completely extinguished, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion, began to surrender, dropping their weapons and sinking to their knees, overwhelmed by the unexpected resilience of Riverstone. In the heart of the square, under the flickering light of the remaining fires, Viper, defeated and alone, stared at Peggy, a flicker of something akin to understanding, or perhaps just despair, crossing his features before the fight was finally knocked out of him. The long night was finally drawing to a close. Riverstone had weathered the storm, battered but not broken, its spirit not extinguished but forged anew in the fires of adversity. The immediate aftermath was a scene of exhaustion and dazed relief. The air, thick with the smell of smoke and damp earth, was slowly being pierced by the first hesitant rays of dawn. The adrenaline that had fueled the defenders of Riverstone began to ebb, replaced by a bone-deep weariness, but also an undeniable sense of triumph. The silence, after the hours of chaotic violence, was profound, broken only by the crackling of embers and the occasional sob of relief. Townspeople emerged from their homes, their faces streaked with soot and emotion, to survey the damage. There were broken windows and charred walls, but there were also smiles of relief and hugs of shared experience. Neighbors helped neighbors, checking for injuries, offering comfort, and beginning the long process of clearing the debris. The surrendered Shadow Reapers, a pathetic and dejected bunch, were rounded up by Sheriff Brody and his deputies, their earlier swagger completely gone. The hired mercenaries, those who hadn't fled, were a different story, cold, professional, and surprisingly compliant now that their paymaster was defeated. In the town square, Peggy stood amidst the weary but jubilant townsfolk, Iron Jack and Sheriff Brody close by. She felt a deep sense of gratitude and pride, not for the victory itself, but for the way the community had come together, the way fear had been overcome by courage and division by unity. Viper, bruised and defeated, his face a mask of sullen anger, was being led away in handcuffs. As he passed Peggy, his eyes met hers for a brief moment. There was no hatred in Peggy's gaze, only a quiet sadness for the choices he had made. For the first time, Viper seemed to see her not as a frail, old woman, but as someone who possessed a strength he could never understand. The days that followed were a blur of activity. The focus shifted from defense to healing and rebuilding. Volunteers from neighboring towns arrived, offering assistance. The Veterans Guard, their military skills proving useful in a different kind of operation, organized the cleanup efforts, bringing order to the chaos. But more than the physical rebuilding, there was a profound shift in the spirit of Riverstone. The fear that the Shadow Reapers had instilled was gone, replaced by a newfound sense of resilience and community. People who had previously kept to themselves now spoke to each other, shared stories, and offered support. The shared experience of the attack had forged a bond between them, an understanding that they were all in this together. An unexpected development emerged from the ashes of the conflict. Some of the younger members of the Shadow Reapers, facing the reality of their situation and the genuine kindness offered by some of the townspeople, began to express remorse for their actions. They saw the stark contrast between the destructive path they had been following and the positive force the Veterans Guard represented. Tentatively, hesitantly, some of them reached out, offering to help with the cleanup, seeking a path towards redemption. Peggy, with her inherent understanding of human nature and the potential for change, advocated for giving them a chance. Everyone deserves a second chance, she told a slightly skeptical town council, especially those who are willing to admit their mistakes and work to make amends. The Veterans Guard, surprisingly, became instrumental in this process. They offered mentorship, guidance, and even job opportunities to some of the former gang members. It wasn't easy. There was still mistrust and resentment, but slowly, cautiously, bridges began to be built. The town square, once a potential battleground, became a symbol of this transformation. The damaged buildings were repaired, not just with bricks and mortar, but with a renewed sense of purpose. A community garden was established in the center of the square, a symbol of growth and renewal, tended to by both longtime residents and former gang members working side by side. Peggy, though she continued to prefer her quiet routine, became an undeniable symbol of Riverstone's strength and resilience. She didn't seek recognition, but it found her nonetheless. People would stop her on the street, not just to say hello, but to thank her, their voices filled with genuine gratitude. One evening, as the sun set over a peaceful Riverstone, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Peggy sat on her porch, a gentle breeze rustling through the leaves of the old oak tree in her yard. Iron Jack sat beside her, a comfortable silence settling between them. "You know," Peggy said softly, her gaze fixed on the horizon, "it's funny, isn't it? All it took was a little bit of trouble to show us what we were truly capable of." Iron Jack nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "You woke us up, Peggy. You reminded us what it means to stand together." Peggy chuckled softly. "Maybe sometimes that's all it takes. Just a little nudge, a little reminder that we're stronger together than we are apart." She paused, her gaze turning to the quiet town, now bathed in the soft glow of twilight. "And maybe," she added, her voice barely a whisper, "maybe even those who seem lost can find their way back if someone is willing to offer them a hand." The true victory in Riverstone wasn't just the defeat of a motorcycle gang. It was the rediscovery of community, the triumph of courage over fear, and the quiet, enduring power of one remarkable woman who, with a single phone call, changed everything. The shadows had been pushed back, not by force alone, but by the light of unity and the unwavering belief in the possibility of redemption. And in the heart of Riverstone, a small town nestled in the Virginia countryside, a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit had been forged. In the end, the tale of Riverstone resonates beyond a simple victory over a gang. It speaks to the potent courage that can reside in the most unassuming hearts, proving that bravery knows no age. It underscores the undeniable power of unity, demonstrating how a community, bound together, can overcome even the darkest threats. Moreover, it offers a poignant testament to the possibility of redemption, highlighting the transformative impact of second chances and the potential for change even in those who have strayed. Finally, it subtly honors the enduring legacy of service, showcasing how the bonds and skills forged in dedication can continue to fortify and protect communities. Ultimately, Riverstone's story is a powerful reminder that true strength lies not in aggression, but in the courage to stand up, the unity to stand together, the compassion to offer hope, and the enduring spirit to believe in the possibility of a better future.